Welcome back, everyone. This week we have I want to say the great schos, but it's kind of a tragic story, parasha Shelach, and it's Haftara, which we're going to study today, the second parak of Sefer Yehoshua. Now you say to yourself, well, I say to myself, wow, second parak of Sefer Yehoshua, that's pretty straightforward. That's going to be pretty interesting. I know Sefer Yehoshua, and it's kind of true. The words are easy, the narrative is straightforward, the language is clear. Right? Yehoshua sends two spies to Yericho. They come to the house of Rachav Azona, where they're almost immediately identified as spies. The king chases after them. She'll hide them, but she wants a deal. She wants to be saved. So the Meraglim lay out the conditions under which she'll be saved, and she agrees to it. She tells the Meraglim exactly how to get out. She lowers them by a rope from her house, which is in the wall. She tells them where to go. She tells them how long to stay. They do all that. They are saved. They go back to Yehoshua. They give him a happy report. And later on, a few prakim later, we conquer Yericho. End of story. Happy story. All that is true. And obviously, the connection to our parasha, couldn't be any more obvious, right? We read in this week's parasha the tragic story of the Meraglim, what a terrible mistake it was for Moshe or God, as we'll see in a second, to send them, right? The aftermath of that terrible story is, instead of Achara Sayom Mechoreb Derech HaSeir Ad Kadesh Barnea, it should have been an 11-day journey from Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael. It took us 40 years, right? Tragically. And it's not just that it took us 40 years. If you were one of the Yotzei Mitzrayim, if you were 20 years old or more when we left Mitzrayim, it was a death sentence. Ba midbar hazeh yiplu pigrechem, right? You're going to die in the midbar. We could say, oh, it's just 40 years, but it's horrible if you're the people. It's really tragic. Now, more than any other Haftarah that we've seen to date, right? We've seen Haftarahs that teach us things about the parasha. We've seen insights into the parasha that teach us things about the Haftarah. This is a Haftarah that I think is completely understandable on its own, and basically I've essentially described it already, but it teaches us incredibly important things about the story in our parasha. And I think in many ways it's impossible to read Parasha Shelach without reading the Haftarah in Sefer Yehoshua. Okay, I think it's the reverse of learning things about the Haftarah. I think it's learning things about the parasha, right? Having sat in shul, and I remember the experience, having sat in shul, and it kind of becomes part of you, the sadness of the mistake of the Meraglim, and how sad the whole story is. And then all of a sudden, here's the Haftarah. Vayishlach Yehoshua bin Nun min Shittim shnayim anashim Meraglim cheresh lemor l'chu re'u et haaretz vet Yericho vayelchu vayivo beit Yishav zona shma rachav vayishkivu shama. And you say to yourself, really? Having just read about what a mistake it was to send the Meraglim, Yehoshua is going to do the exact same thing? What? And if the Meraglim come back and say, oh, Yericho is really a difficult city to conquer, which it was, then we're not going to go? Could that be? HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised us the land. That's all we need. That's the message of the parasha. There's no need to send Meraglim. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells you you can do it, you can do it, right? It's such a strong question when you say that. Well, how could Yehoshua have made the same mistake 40 years later? And Yehoshua wasn't just somebody who knew the story. Yehoshua was one of the Meraglim. So it means somehow we've missed something important about the parasha, and we have to go back and look at it again. And when you do, the first thing you notice is about the story of the spies in our parasha. It's not the only place in the Torah. Right? In Parshas Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's recounting the story of our early years in the Midbar, he retells the story. But there it's slightly different. Right? This week's Parsha reads, Shlach lecha anashim v'yatur et eretz Canaan asher ani noten b'nei Yisrael, ish echad lemateh avotav tishlachu kol nasi b'hem. Right? We're going to send one nasi from every shevet, and they'll get the information that we need. And Rashi right there, anticipating the fact that we're going to come to Parshas Devarim later on, knowing the problem, says Shlach lecha l'da'atcha, Right? Shlach sounds like God is saying this is a really good idea. Says Rashi, but how could God think it's a good idea? It ends in tragedy. So he says, no, l'data. Ani eini mitzaveh lecha. I'm not commanding you to send Meraglim. Im tirtzeh shlach. But if you want to, I'm not going to stop you. Why? Lefi shabo Yisrael v'amru nishlecha anoshim lefanenu. Right? Bnei Yisrael came in Parshas Devarim. We'll see that in a second. And they said, "V'shenemar v'tikurvuna kulchem." You all came and asked for it. Umoshe nimlach b'shchina. So all Bnei Yisrael comes and says, "We want to send spies." So Moshe asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Amar, Ani amarti lahem shehi tova. So Rashi, quoting the Medrash, says, I said the land is good. Shenemar, aletchem me'oni mitzrayim el ha'aretz tova rechava, right? To a beautiful land. Chayehem she'ani noten lahem makom l'ta'utam, l'ta'ut, b'divrei ha'meraglim, l'man lo yeshua. So in Rashi's telling, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I've told you the land is perfect. You should just go. Oh, you don't believe me? Okay, I'm going to let you send Meraglim, and let's see what happens. So first of all, what does it say in Parshas Devarim? So there the pasuk says, Vatikrivune Thai, this is in Perek Aleph of Sefer Devarim, pasuk Chaf Bet, Vatikrivune Kulchem, Vatomru, Nish Lecha Anashim Lefanenu V'ach Pulanu Ataretz. Let's send spies. V'yashivu otanu davar et haderech asher na'aleba ve'et ha'orim asher navo alehen. And the spies will tell us how we should conquer Yericho. And then really what I think of the most courageous pasuk in all of Tanakh, Moshe Rabbeinu, knowing exactly what happened 40 years before, knowing what its tragedy ends, and says, Vayitav b'nai hadavar. I got to tell the truth. I thought it was a good idea. What's the downside? So Moshe says, yeah, even knowing in retrospect how tragic it was, Moshe says, when I heard the idea, I thought it was a good idea. Okay? Now, the truth is, of all the Mefarshim, and I'm partial here, the Ramban, I think, does the best job of explaining, in my opinion at least, what exactly happened and how you synthesize the psukim of Shlach L'chan Hashem, which sounds like it's God's idea, with Vatikrivunai Kulchem. Says the Ramban, and it could be that he does the best job because unlike Rashi, he has the time and the space to describe it, right? Rashi is very limited. Rashi told himself, I'm writing on the psukim, I'm explaining a pasuk. The Ramban can explain a theme. So says the Ramban, this is the summary of the Ramban. I think everybody should look inside. The Rambans are amazing on this week's parasha, amazing on every parasha. But in summary, the Ramban seems to say, the idea of sending spies was not the problem, right? We're not, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said we're going to conquer Yericho, but it's our responsibility to find out how. It's our responsibility to come up with a military strategy. It's our responsibility to try to figure out how we're going to breach the walls of Yericho, which at the time seemed like a difficult thing to have to breach, right? We believe that we're going to inherit Yericho. We believe that we're going to inherit Eretz Yisrael. God promised us that. But how to go about doing that, how to minimize the nace that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is obligated to do for us, that's our responsibility. And the Rambam points out many examples in Tanakh where we sent Meraglim, where we sent spies, and nothing bad happened. Because the idea of getting military information in advance is kind of a useful thing. Okay? Now, it happens to be that it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu who decided, knowing the future, and this is a very, very sensitive and difficult topic, like if HaKadosh Baruch Hu knew what was going to happen, why did he let them do it? Here you see the self-imposed limitations that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has on Hashgacha Pratis. Meaning, if we want something, he can try in the margins to push us in the right directions, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. So the Ramban says, yes, we said we want to send spies. When you want to send spies, it means you send 20-year-old nameless people from the Mossad. We're never going to know who they are. We're going to send these people. They're going to come back and report to Moshe Rabbeinu. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, seeing what's going to happen and worrying about it, says, you know what? If something bad is going to happen, Let's not blame it on two, little shabaknikim. Let's send the nisiim. Let's not send spies. Let's send some that I think of more as like a fact-finding mission. Let's send senators. Let's send Nancy Pelosi, right? Not to climb through bushes and to come back with the facts, to walk the land and see how we can come up with a strategy to conquer the land. Not to see if we should conquer the land, but we're going to conquer the land. How should we do it? Okay. The fact that 10 out of 12 of the Meraglim misunderstood the question speaks more to the fact that they are the Dor Yotzei Mitzrayim. They were leaving Egypt. They had been in bondage their whole lives. It could be that some of the Meraglim and many of the more Hasidic Sfarim say this. They didn't really want to move into Eretz Yisrael. Living in Eretz Yisrael, as we know now, demands a level of independence that maybe the Dor Yotzei Mitzrayim weren't up to. Maybe it had to be. Okay, so Yehoshua learns these messages, the messages of Parasha Shelach, and he doesn't send the Nisiim. He sends Shnaim Anashim Meraglim Cheresh Lemor. Two unnamed people. Yes, it's true, the Medrash says that they're Kalev and Pinchas, but in the Psukim there are no names, right? They're unnamed. They're just people who work for the Shabak, people who work for the Secret Service, and they're going to come back with the facts. Okay, that's who he sends. Aside from that, and this is something I don't want to talk about, we normally contrast our Parsha with Yehoshua to say, this sending of the spies was successful, and this wasn't. The fact that our Parsha wasn't a successful mission of the spies, that's beyond debate. Whether Yehoshua, Perek Bet, what we read in this week's Haftara, whether that was successful, that's not so clear. Rav Meidan has real reservations about how successful it was, right? They had to save all of Rachav's family, all the people of Canaan who they were supposed to kill. Otherwise, okay, but that's a separate issue. Let's leave that aside. But that's the first thing I wanted to say, not just the connection with our Parsha, but what we see about Parasha Shelach, how the idea of Meraglim is not in and of itself dangerous. It might be dangerous, but it's not in and of itself a mistake. It's what you do with it. It's how the Meraglim behave that can be problematic, and that in what our case was problematic. But I want to make one more big point about our Haftarah. If you ask yourself, and it's a useful question to ask, who's the hero of our Haftarah? The answer is, and it's surprising, the answer is Rachav Hazonah. And the idea that it's Rachav is surprising, but it's something that I saw in the writings of Moshe Lechosin, in the writings of Rabbi Gideon Rothstein, the same idea. And let me explain it to you. The pasuk says, "Vayelchu vayabo beis isha zona ushma Rachav vayishkivu shama." The first thing that we hear is her profession, right? You don't read "Vayelchu vayabo beit isha shma Rachav v'hi zona." No. "Vayelchu vayabo beit isha zona," right? Why is the Haftarah, why is the Navi so obsessed to tell us that she was a zona, she was a prostitute? That's a really bad thing. So on a fundamental level, right, if you're a spy, going to the house of a zona, of a prostitute, is a really good idea. Everybody's a little uncomfortable. Nobody's asking questions. Everybody's a little strange. You go there. It's a good place to get information. It's a good place to go. Also, where did she live? The pasuk says, "Ki beita b'kir hachoma uva'choma hi yoshavet." Literally, she lives as far outside of the source of power in the city as anybody can live. She lives literally in the wall. Presumably, people who live on or in the wall, it's a socioeconomic fact, right? They're not rich. They're not part of the inner workings of the society. They're just getting by. It also helps us to understand why she's a zonah. Right? The Gemara says she became a zonah at the age of 10. So I'm just going to speculate here, but when you become a zonah at the age of 10, it's not out of a sense of desire, but perhaps it's out of a sense of obligation. Your family can't make ends meet. It's really, really difficult for them. This is what you can do for your family. Yes, it's immoral. Yes, it's horrible. But that's perhaps why a girl of 10 becomes a zonah. Okay, so she does that. Now, if you imagine she's from a socioeconomically disadvantaged family, she's living on the margins of society, and all of a sudden, the king needs her. Says the pasuk, "Vayishlach melech Yericho el Rachav lemar, hotzi'i ha'anashim haboim elayich asher bo leveitech hilach bar ta'aretz banu." Bo. The people who came to your house, the king has the information. He's right. These people are spies. They've come to spy. Give them to me, and presumably he's going to kill them. Now, there's no reason for the king to assume that Rachav would lie to him. She's part of the society of Yericho, right? Why would she possibly lie? And so he assumes she's telling the truth when she says, when the pasuk says, "Vatikacha isha et shnei ha'anashim vatitzpino," she hides the two spies. Vatomer, and she says to the king, "King, you're right. Bo elai ha'anashim." These people came to me. V'lo yadati ma'ayin heim. I didn't ask where they came from. They could have been the spies. Vayashar liskor, right? At the time, v'yichos sogeret u'musugeret, it was completely locked in. So he said, at the end of the day, she says, "Vayashar liskor," and they're going to close the gate. B'choshech v'anashim yatsu, and they left. Lo yadati ana halchu ha'anashim. I don't know where they went. Ridfu maher acharem ki tasigum, chase after them. Send your people to chase after them, and you'll catch them. It's a brilliant, ruse that she has. Brilliant idea. The king sends the people to chase after the spies, right? And they do. But the spies have not left town, as Rachav says. The spies are literally hiding in her house, right? It's that moment that changes everything. It's a dangerous thing Rachav does. When the king says, "Give me the people," logic says she should have said, "Okay, here they are. I have no connection to them. I have no commitment to them. I have no moral connection. Nothing. These people came, they're spies. Okay, I'll give them to you." But for some reason, and the sense you get, it's not economic. She's bought into their story. She's bought into our story. In Chazal, the Gemara says that Rachav converted. She was a Gioris and great people came from her. This is the beginning of that story, right? She made a moral decision. The Jews are right, and the Jews deserve what they're going to get, and maybe we deserve what we're going to get. We're an immoral society, right? Her newfound morality is seen really even more so in her request of the Meraglim. What does she ask of them? So says the pasuk, "Vata hishavuna li badonai ki asiti imachem chased va'asitem gam atem im beit avi chesed unetatem li otamet." She said, "I've saved your lives," literally, right? In that moment when she's hiding them, presumably the two spies think to themselves, "We're dead, right? We're going to be caught. There's no question about it." She saved their lives. And she says, "I saved your lives. Now save my life." V'hachayitem et avi ve'et imi ve'et achai ve'et achyotai ve'et kol asher lahem v'hitzaltem et nafshotenu mimavet. She doesn't want to just save her life, right? What a moral commitment. She wants to save her parents. She wants to save her brothers, her sisters, their children, their spouses, maybe cousins. It's a little hard to tell from the pasuk. She wants to save her entire family. And even when the Meraglim tighten the conditions, and it's kind of difficult to read, they say, "Hine anachnu ba'im ba'aretz, et tikvat chut hashani hazeh tikshri b'chalon asher radatanu bo," right? Take this red thread, tie it to the window from which you're letting us, right? She eventually lowered them down by rope from her house in the wall to outside of the city, right? Do that. Ve'et avich ve'et imech ve'et achayich ve'et kol beit avich ta'asvi elayich habayta. It's important that the people we have to save are in your house already. V'aya kol asher yitzei mitaltei beitech hachutza. If any of the family leaves the house, damo barosho. He's responsible for his own death. Va'anachnu nikiyim. We're not responsible. V'chol asher yeh itach babayit damo baroshenu im yad tiyabo. But if they're in your house and we kill them, it's our fault. And then the Meraglim say, Vim tagidi et devarini zeh, if you tell anybody what just happened, vayinu nikiyim mishvatech asher hishbatanu, then all bets are off. And she's all in. She accepts the additional conditions. She wants to do the right thing. And as an aside, the story is so reminiscent of Mitzrayim, right? And of putting the red blood on the doors, and if you leave the house, you'll be in danger, but if you stay in the house, you won't. It's just very, very reminiscent of that. Okay? And now the Psukim go on. It's earlier in the Haftara, but it's an important thing to point out. How do the Meraglim know when they report to Yehoshua and they say, "Oh, no problem, we're gonna conquer Yericho"? How do they know? So Rachav says to them, "Vatomer la'anashim, yadati ki natan Adonai lachem et haaretz, v'chi nafla eimatchem aleinu, v'chi namogu kol yoshvei haaretz mipneichem." I know that you're going to win, and I know because we're terrified of you. Ki shamanu eit asher hovish Adonai et mei yam suf mipneichem b'tzeitchem mitzrayim, v'asher asitem lishtei malchei ha'amori asher be'ever ha'yarden l'sichon u'l'og asher hacharamtem otam. We've heard already about Kriyas Yam Suf. We've heard how you conquered Sichon and Og. And finally, Vanishma vayimas levavenu, we're terrified. V'lo kama od ruach beish mipnechem. Ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohim bashamayim mimal v'alas mitachas. Right, and she adds, and she doesn't have to, because you have the true God. It's almost like, if you compare it to Ruth, it's like, this is Hagir. She announces, Ki Hashem Elokechem hu Elokim bashamayim mal v'alas mitachas. God, your God, is the one and only God. Right? She's accepting Ol Malchus Shamayim in some strange way. It's a story of both personal redemption on behalf of Rachav and national redemption, and how we learned our lesson, and how no one in Bnei Israel at this point asks the question, how do we know? How do we know God's going to help us? How do we know we're going to win the war? Right? Yericho is surrounded by a wall. It's a walled city. There was no way to breach it. But it's no hesitation. There's no doubt. We're about to conquer Eretz Israel. Now, I think often, because when you talk about, what's the most miraculous battle ever in the history of Am Yisrael? The answer is Yericho. We walked around 7 times, the walls fell down. What happened when the walls fell down? Meaning, we still had to go in and poke them, with the pointy side of the sword. Right? They didn't just die of a cold. We had to kill them. There was a battle. There had to be a battle. Yes, it was won from the start because they were terrified and hiding behind walls, and we just came in and slaughtered them. But that had to happen. You needed an army. You needed stuff for Am Yisrael to do. That's a part of the story. But the bigger part is just the end. The report to Yehoshua came directly from Rachav. And people say, Vayomru Yehoshua ki natan Adonai bi'adeinu et kol haaretz v'gam namog kol yishras mipaneinu. 1, God already promised us we're going to win. And 2, now that we were there, we see the people are terrified of us. And if we think of ourselves, right, we think how much different our history would have been if during parasha Shelach we responded the way people did during the time of Yehoshua. I'm not saying better or worse. I'm just saying different. And if that's the case, how much more so would have been if in 1948, a year before, a year after, whatever, the Frum community, people like us, said to ourselves, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to live in the land. He's giving us back our home. And we took advantage of that. How different the state of Israel would look today. Anyway, we're incredibly grateful for having the state of Israel today. We're incredibly grateful for the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it to us. And we're thankful to him. And I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and see you next week.